little bit of clarity in thinking about trade. A lot of these questions will come up, the ones that are posted here, and if I don't address it directly, just hit me with it, because they're interesting and thoughtful questions and deeply important. So I want to address how to think clearly about trade, and first just pose a question, because of a lot of discourse, popular discourse about trade is influenced by this. Is anyone here blocked by this? I'm going to move it over a little bit. There we go. And that is whether, the way I'm going to portray it, in general, trade is mutually beneficial. It leads to harmony, as we can see here. Oh, thank you so much. We had one of the questions here about liberal ideas uniting people and stopping wars. So that's a clear statement of that question. So that's a thesis that I think is the case. But other people see it differently. They see trade as deeply predatory. So outside are two beautiful cats. They're so sweet. I live with cats. I have 6 owners who own me. And they're cute and cuddly. They're also, I never forget, predators, right? Once they're out, but they're also reciprocators in their predation. They bring me gifts, lizards, frogs, and birds. And it's sometimes a little heartbreaking because usually the birds don't survive it. The lizards and the frogs I can get from them, and they go on their way, and I think generally they survive. But cats are predators. That's how they live. There are no vegetarian cats. So there are no Jane cats and so on. This is not possible. That's how they survive. So in the back of your mind, think about this question that's so often posed, that trade is a form of predation, or the way I think it ought to be understood, it's a form of mutual benefit. So that's a background discussion. I want to start with an important distinction between kinds of advantage. And I think it comes up, this predation versus mutual benefit issue is tied up in this. When we say Kumar has the advantage, we normally think of absolute advantage, right? He has lots of absolute advantages over me. He's probably a better cricket player than I am, since I have never even begun to understand the cricket. It's almost impossible for people who didn't grow up with it to get it. He's smarter than I am. He probably can run faster than I can. He has all kinds of advantages. That's how we normally think of it, the absolute advantage. He's better at something. But I think we should focus on comparative advantage. So I have a random name generator, just popped up these 2 names, Kumar and Tom, total randomness. And think about what comparative advantage is, and the kind of paradox, when we specialize and trade, we can consume more than we can produce. Now, how's that possible? How can you consume more than you can produce? And I want to give an example with Kumar and Tom. So imagine we have an economy, and we'll make it very simple. It could be multiplied and made more complex. It would just take another hour or 2 to work through the charts. Imagine the simple economy, 2 beings and 2 goods. So there are apples and fish. So a bit like, I think Mohit talked about coconuts and fish. So here I've got apples and fish. And Kumar has the absolute advantage in production of both. Kumar is awesome. He's very good at both of these things. So if Tom spends all day, in any given day, gathering apples, he can gather 50. But if, alternatively, he spent all day gathering fish, he could also catch 50 fish. So, in the same amount of time, so one day, Kumar can gather 100 apples or 200 fish. He's really good. He's good at fishing and he's good at appling. And he's better than Tom. He has the absolute advantage over Tom. So why would he want to cooperate with Tom, in the technical language of welfare economics, Tom is called a pathetic loser. He can't do anything well. He can't catch fish. He can't gather apples in comparison to Kumar. So why would there be any possibility of mutual advantage? Why would Kumar want to hang out with Tom, right? This is the high school question, right? Well, we'll get to it, so we'll walk through this. The elite people don't want to hang out with the losers, right? I was often in that group, especially with sports. Not good at sports, and when you're in high school, that's a big deal. So I was a little bit of the out group, not the cool kids. Well, let's look at their production in isolation. So there's no trade. Now, one thing that they do have in common is mothers. And what is one thing mothers typically tell their children? Don't eat just all apples or all fish. You need a balanced diet, right? Eat your vegetables, eat your pulses, and so on. So you can't just focus on candy or the one thing you like. You need a balanced diet. So some apples and some fish. So they each split their time. 50% of the day is going to apples and 50% to fishing. So in one day, Tom will produce 25 apples, that's half of 50, and 25 fish, half of 50 again. In Kumar, being virtually godlike, half of 100 is 50, half of 200 is 100. So he's producing 50 and 100, Tom just 25 and 25. Not very impressive. Now, Kumar, as I mentioned, is smarter. And he thinks about this and he comes to Tom. Let's say they're on different ends of an island, the island that Mohit described. And he says, how about a trade? I'll give you 37 fish for 25 apples. Tom's not very bright, but Kumar looks like a trustworthy, decent chap. So he says, okay, I'll try that. So now they specialize. Tom gives up fishing for appling, right? Spends all the day gathering apples and not fishing. Kumar reduces by 50% his apple gathering, so he goes from 50 to 25, which allows him to increase 50% time on fishing. So he can go from 100 to 150. So the numerical ratios are quite constant. There's no trick. There's no hidden wires behind this, no mirrors. It's just pretty straightforward arithmetic. And now they trade. Well, Tom had 50, and he sends over 25 of his apples. So now he goes from 50 to 25, and Kumar goes from 25 to 50. And then Kumar had 150 fish. Tom had 0. 37 fish go over here. Tom has 37. And 150 minus 37 is 113. Now here's the weird thing. In the absence of trade, Tom would have had 25 apples. Now he has 37, or fish, pardon me. Now he has 37 fish. Kumar, in the absence of trade, has only 100 fish. Now he's gone to 113. Both of them have more. Both of them now can consume more than they were able to produce. And so there's now surplus available. They're both better off. Both of them have more. And this is weird. And it took a long time for anyone to figure this out. Aristotle didn't understand it. Thomas Aquinas didn't understand it. It's not in the Arthashastra, as far as I know. It's not in Adam Smith. It's David Ricardo, who was studying the trade between England and Portugal for wine and woolen products and so on, and looking at the numbers and studying it carefully, and he figured it out. Now, Paul Samuelson, who was a very important economist, the famous story, he was once asked to name something, I think Mohit may have mentioned that also. One important thesis in economics that's true, not trivial, and not obvious. A lot of things, you explain it, people say, oh yeah, right? This is not obvious. It took a long time for people to figure this out. But it's one of the most important theses in social science as a foundation of mutual benefit. Now let's think then about why, how it works out, how comparative advantage plays out in this context. So, Tom is less productive in absolute terms than Kumar, but he's the lowest cost producer of apples. So think about cost. Cost is what you give up when you do something. That's a notion. To be more specific in economics, you use the term opportunity cost. And I'll digress for a moment. This is important. Maybe other languages don't have this problem, but English, I would say to Manas, how much did that bag cost, your beautiful rucksack, backpack? And he would probably say so many rupees. So he'd give me a number of rupees. That's the cost of the bag. In a way, it's a kind of inaccurate language. What he tells me is the price of the bag. So about how much would this bag cost in rupees? 2,000 rupees. So the price of the bag is 2,000 rupees. When you go to the store to buy it, they say 2,000 rupees. 2,000 rupees and a bag. The cost, actually, is whatever he would have done had he not spent the 2,000 rupees. But that also includes his time, his search cost. He had to search for the right bag that just has an exquisite perfection to it. He had to go to the shop, and then what would he have done with 2,000 rupees on something else? Saving it for the future, spending it on going out on a date, who knows what, all those different things. That's the cost, what you gave up. The price is what's exchanged. We use the term in the English language often interchangeably, but it's important as social scientists to distinguish. The price is what is exchanged. The cost is what is given up. And sometimes critics of economics who are hostile will say kind of nasty things like saying, you believe everything has a price. So that's actually not true. Not everything has a price. For example, Akanksha, well, that's a little hard for my, Akanksha comes to me and she says, Tom, we're sick of Kumar. How much to betray him to his death? And I would say, no amount of money would convince me to do that. There is not a price for that friendship. It wouldn't do it. A decent person would not do that, right? So Arjun, different story. But decent people don't do that. There is no price. There is a cost of my loyalty to my friend, which is giving up the 87 rupees that was just offered to me. I had to think about it a little bit. But I said, no. So the cost is I give up what's offered. There is a cost. Every choice has a cost. That's what it means to have a choice. You have at least two possibilities. One of them you give up to get the other one. Every choice has a cost, but not everything has a price. Now, some economists talk about shadow prices and so on, but there's no exchange that took place because I wouldn't do it. So the cost is what is given up. For Tom to get an apple, he gives up one fish. But for Kumar to produce one apple, he has to give up two fish. Remember, he can produce in one day 100 apples or 200 fish. So to get one more apple, he gives up two fish. But Tom only has to give up one. So Tom has a comparative advantage in appling. His cost of production of apples is lower than Kumar's. It's one fish rather than two. And consequently, if he specializes in his comparative advantage, which is apple gathering, and Kumar then can exploit his comparative advantage, which is fish production, because remember, one fish costs him half an apple. But one fish for Tom costs one apple. That's what he has to give up to get another fish. You end up, each one uses their comparative advantage, focuses on that. Then when they trade, they can both consume more because they do the thing that has the lower cost. So you take simple, kind of intuitively obvious examples of fruit production. You can grow a banana in Norway. You actually can. But you have to give up a lot of salmon to do that because you have to build a hothouse and give artificial light, and it has to be the right temperature because bananas do not like snow and ice. You cannot grow them in snowy, icy places. Honduras, bananas grow in abundance. But you can't grow apples in Honduras. Oh, wait, you can. If you make a house that's cold and will get you the right climate for an apple. So that there's trade between, let's say, Minnesota. You can't grow bananas at low cost. It's very high cost to grow a banana. You give up lots of other things. They trade apples. If you go to Honduras, you can buy apples in the market, and they typically come from either deeper South America or North America, where the climate works. But then there are all kinds of other things we can think about that are not just fruit, that are geographically located, right? That's kind of obvious. Although there are people, the Trumpists and so on, who complain about importing bananas and so on. And you'll find sometimes people talk about our banana deficit. Seriously? It turns out, and this is actually a complaint that has been made, the U.S. imports more bananas from Honduras than it exports to Honduras, which is a surprise to some people. And they think it's unfair. How dare they? It's predatory behavior towards our local banana industry. But let's take other things that are not so obviously geographical. Look at India. Because of the heritage of colonialism and exploitation of all the bad things that happened, but it left something which is an English-speaking population, many of them with a high degree of education. It turned out that's a pretty awesome comparative advantage. IT. Something you can export without having to put it in a boat because of the internet and so on. And this meant that there's a huge comparative advantage. So years ago, when we'd have call centers, and I had Microsoft Windows, which is a living nightmare. I shudder every time I try to remember my early Windows, always crashing. And fortunately, Microsoft had these phone lines. You could call an 800 number, which meant zero toll. They paid it. And someone would answer with a very deep Indian, beautiful Indian accent and say, "Hi, this is Bob." And you say, "Okay, I'm pretty sure that that's not the name your parents gave you, but that's okay. That's fine." Because it's 2:30 in the morning and I'm struggling with my computer, and a very well-educated person would explain to me, go to the programming line and ram a line out. None of you probably know what that means, but it meant you had to put in some little characters to correct the defect. It's like a nightmare. But this person was sitting in an air-conditioned office in a nice place, talking to a dumb person in North America, explaining how to make his computer work. Radiology is another example. So radiology labs were established, highly trained and qualified doctors. It used to be radiology was not a tradable good because someone would have to fly to India to get a radiology exam, x-ray, and so on from an Indian doctor. But then with the internet, when a doctor at 3 o'clock in the morning in New York wants to get a second opinion on a scan, there was an accident, they do an x-ray, and normally, these cases, doctors want a second opinion. So I look at it, I'm the doctor, but I want another doctor to look at it and see if I'm right or not, right? They send it over the internet to a doctor sitting in an office in a hospital in India who reads it says, ah, well, yes, you're right, this is broken, or no, no, I see a different fracture here, and so on. And it turns out there were comparative advantages there. So they're not just geographical fruit-based things. There's all kinds of comparative advantages. Many of them might be rooted in cultural features, sometimes historical accidents, but it turns out they have some advantage. And you end up with all kinds of interesting things. Go to small motels in the United States. Well, first off, hotels, huge numbers of Indian entrepreneurs in North American hotel business. It's staggering. But even go to the small ones, go to a little town in South Dakota, right, if you are so inclined to go to South Dakota. And you'll find in this elegant little small hotel, when you walk in, you can smell curry because the family are from India. And it turns out, majority from Gujarat. Why? I don't know. Some people have speculated Gujaratis have a long tradition of hospitality, and this gave them an advantage in running motels. Another theory is it was just family connections, right? So this is why 50% of dry cleaners in North America are from Korea. I don't know why. Was there something about Korean culture that is conducive to dry cleaning? It's possible. It's probably just the accident of family connections, right? That one group family came in, they went into this business, they did well. Cousins come, buy the business, they go to a bigger one, and so on. So comparative advantage shouldn't be thought of as just geography. It's also culture, its historical accident, and so on. The Irish also have a lot of call centers now, and the reason is Irish accents are delightful. When Irish people speak, they're just so friendly. They say, ah, good morning, top of the morning to you. How can I help you with your problem, you dumb bastard? Right? And it's just sort of delightful. They're always so nice and sweet. So just because of their accent in English, they get all these call centers. So comparative advantage allows us to produce the things at lower cost and to mutual benefit. Now, some implications. There are gains from trade internationally. Okay, this is the one I've been talking about. But remember, there's nothing unique or exceptionally special about trade across state borders, any more than trade from one town to another. There's nothing distinctive about trade between Indians and Japanese that is not also true about trade between people from Kerala and people from Rajasthan. It's the same principles that are at work. People get confused by some complexity when you have to deal with A, trade laws, and B, different currencies, but the fundamentals are just the same. This principle is identical. Trade between Mumbai and Kochi, no different than Tokyo and Cairo. And indeed, in business, this is something that I learned through just experience. The same thing is true in every single business and every business decision. It's the question to make it or buy it. Do we make or buy something? So we think about car production. An automobile has wheels and tires, right? If you don't have them, they don't go very far, right? If you don't have tires on your car, it's not going to move you and do what it's supposed to do. So, do car companies make tires? Of course, cars have tires. They make tires. They must be making the tires. Turns out not. Other companies have a comparative advantage in tire production, and car companies buy the tires from them. And you can think about other examples. Cars have a lot of metal in them, therefore, car manufacturers must own mines to mine the ore, to turn into the metal, to turn into car. That's not true. Other people are better at mining, and there are other people better at smelting, and there are people who are better at transportation, right? So you always ask, make it or buy it. And that's true, by the way, in think tanks as well. Make it or buy it. Should we hire someone internal to our firm to produce the study, or do we outsource it and hire a contractor to produce the study? And the same thing for everything else. Should you have your own full-time webmaster with their special room with the crystal ball and the sparkling magic that makes the websites? Or do you say, well, that will cost us so much to hire a full-time webmaster, we'll just go to a company to make the website for us and administer it and fix it and update it and so on. So make or buy. It permeates life. So I like these shirts. This one I made, by the way, myself. I grew the cotton. I grew the plants to make the dyes. Then I wove the cotton into shirts after making, of course, the thread first, which is a little bit laborious. It took me 27 years, but I got a shirt, okay? I could make this shirt in some way. If I could make a shirt like this, but I didn't. I paid other people for all of those things, and each one was a separate procedure. The people who grow the cotton, the people who clean the cotton, the people who turn it into thread, the people who dye it. That might be a unified thing, thread making and dyeing, I'm not sure. But then the people who weave it, that's a different thing. The people who then impose the batik color and dye on it, and then the ones who cut it, which is a really specialized thing. The nice thing about these Indonesian batik shirts, everything matches. This is a feature that they weave in, so it's very important. When the dragon appears on one side, the proper part of the dragon is on the other side and not off by, half a meter or something. So make or buy is a fundamental question. So comparative advantage is, again, and I'll use a technical word, it's simply awesome. Once you understand comparative advantage, you will see the world. It's just all around us. It permeates everything we do, is comparative advantage. And now this question about peace, we can ask the question, well, what makes social life together possible? And many philosophers have said it's friendship and love. Love is the foundation of society. And I don't think that's right. Love is, and friendship are the fruits of social cooperation. It's because we can be mutually advantageous that we can be friends. So imagine if we lived in a different world in which every time Kumar is benefited, Tom is harmed, and vice versa. It's kind of hard to imagine them being friends. Every time we shake hands, it's a painful a shock for me. I suffer in some way. It's really not possible to be friends under those conditions if every interaction is harmful to one party in order to generate a benefit for another. So if we want to live in peaceful societies, we need to understand not all interactions are zero-sum. This is a really important point. I don't think anyone here is fooled by this, but if we walked outside, and not just in India, in Norway, in Japan, ask the average person, they think that we live in a zero-sum world. Your benefit came at the expense of someone else who lost. So zero-sum transactions are transactions in which the sum of the benefits equals 0. So Sudhanshu benefits by 10, somebody else lost by 10. And it could be, it's these two gentlemen lost 5 each, or 7 and 3, but it always adds up. And that's the way I think many people think about profit. The profit, someone lost to make that profit. It's not the case. In fact, these are extremely rare. They happen on blackboards. In some gambling situations, we could describe as zero-sum. Setting aside the benefit people get from the gambling experience, people like to gamble for some reason. These are actually much more common, negative sum. The sum of the benefits is less than 0. So let's say there's a criminal in the group. Oh, Vineet. So Vineet here is a criminal, and he wants to get my wallet. And last time I checked, I had 50 rupees in my wallet, but I also have 10 pounds and about 30 euros in my wallet and a few hundred baht. So he wants to get it and take it from me. And let's say there's just a smooth transaction. He lifts it out of my pocket in some way. We'd have a zero-sum transaction in that case. He'd get my pounds, euros, baht, and rupees, and I wouldn't have them anymore. But chances are I'm going to catch him, and there's going to be a fight. And in the conclusion of the fight, he gets pretty badly beaten up, frankly. But he has a knife and stabs me, punctures me, and this is, I'll tell you what happens. If you puncture the surface of my body, liquids come out, and enough of them come out that my life force is extinguished. So he gets, let's say, the equivalent of about 5,000 rupees when you add all the other currencies together, but he's beaten up, and his medical care might cost him 3,000 rupees, so he only gets a benefit of 2,000. I lost my life. And I would value my life at even like 2,300 rupees. That's how much it would take. You'd have to pay me to kill me. Right? So the consequence is that the sum of the benefits is less than zero. These are all around us. Robbery, rape, murder, violence, these are almost invariably negative-sum games. And cronyism, corruption, rent-seeking is typically, I would say, almost invariably a negative-sum game. And this is important because when we think about anti-corruption campaigns, we run into this all the time. People think, the terrible dictator, Lukashenko, Marcos in Philippines, whoever it is, they looted the country. It's true. They stole from everyone. Imelda Marcos had this one house just for her shoes. It's amazing. She had over 5,000 pairs of shoes. Right? Either she didn't wear them that often, or she was a secret millipede, and she actually had lots of little feet that we didn't see. And many people in the Philippines thought, take it back and give it to us and we'll be restored. This is not true. The losses they suffered were far greater than the gains that the Marcos family got. By the way, there's a story that I remember in the Philippines at this time when he was overturned. Many people didn't understand. The poor loved him. He was overwhelmingly popular among the poor and the very rich. It was the middle class who despised him and finally got rid of him. The rich, because they were cronies, so that's not unusual. Not all the rich, but the bulk of the rich people were rich because of him. And the very poor, he would go to garbage dumps where people lived. They lived in the garbage dump, sifting through the trash of other people, even for food, recycling, the food here that was left from the plates. They would then take and consume this. And Marcos would go with some soldiers into the garbage dump and walk through, and people would come up, and he would give them $1, American dollar bill. And they would say, the president gave me $1. But they didn't ask, why do I live in a garbage dump? But I got $1 from the president. Well, if you add up all the Marcos's wealth, it wouldn't equal what they had lost. So when you would ask middle-class Filipino people, what made you so angry about the Marcos family? Was it the shoes, the fancy cars that they had from their stolen loot? And they'd say, well, not really. It was the mining operations of the Marcos family. Mining operations? I'm not aware of many mines in the Philippines. Oh, yes, yes. The Marcos family would go around and say, this is mine, and this is mine. So they were a whole country just stealing from people. Uh, but there's another kind of game, the positive sum game, in which the sum of the benefits is greater than zero. And this is voluntary trade. Yes, sir.
So I was wondering about corruption.
I'm against it, just to be clear.
Corruption
But you
can
could pay
be
me enough to take the other side.
corruption can be positive sum too, though, in various situations. Like
In a discrete situation, but not in the big picture.
Okay, sure.
So there's a case in which Arjun is the government official whose permission is needed for me to, install a machine in my factory under the license Raj. I pay him 6,000 rupees. He gives me the permission. We're both better off compared to not giving the permission. But it's the overall system of corruption that is negative sum. The 6,000 rupees he gets is a tiny fraction of the total suffering he and the system he represents have imposed on everyone else. Is that fair? Okay. But positive sum games are all around us, but most people don't tune into them. And John Stossel, an American journalist, put it very neatly. I'd never thought of it this way until he said it. It's a double thank you. So yesterday, I went and I bought some water, very nice merchant, and also some awesome sugar-free peach-flavored iced tea, which is tasty. And I gave the money, and I said thank you. And what did the merchant say? Thank you. That's weird when you think about it. It's a double thank you. Normally, let's say that I were to trip and fall, and Sarab here were to come and help me up, I would say thank you. And he says, you're welcome. But imagine he says, no, thank you. You think, all right, that'd be kind of a very weird world in which he thanks me for having fallen down. We don't. He says, you're welcome. I say, thank you. But when you buy things, when you exchange, the normal point is thank you, thank you. It means both have benefited, or you don't say thank you. In the case of thank you, you're welcome, he benefited me, but there was no obvious benefit to him other than the knowledge of being a good person, which is something. But he didn't get any additional benefit. So what we really want to do, if we want a peaceful and prosperous society, is to convert negative sum games into positive sum games. And that's hard. This is the whole reform procedure, is turning these into these. Not changing human nature, right, which is the typical socialist approach. We will build a new human being. Right, well, we're still waiting. Turns out, after all those years of communism, it was still the old human being. Despite the concentration camps, the re-education, the torture, the constant propaganda, it was still the old human beings. We didn't get the new Soviet man, new Nehruvian Indian person, and so on. They never showed up. We still have the old ones. So we want to convert negative into positive sum games. This is really the key of all the reform efforts for liberalism, is to change one game into another. So let's think about trade wars. So here we have one of these. I mean, just by the way, containerization is one of the most amazing changes in human history. And it wasn't just because of one person thinking about it. It was a whole series of incremental improvements that ended up lowering the cost of transporting goods to a tiny fraction, just like 1 or 2% of what they had been even just 15 years earlier. So containerization is an astonishing thing. Here is depiction of war. So are there trade wars? Are they, to quote a deeply insightful theorist, good and easy to win? That's Donald Trump, one of the great economists of our time. He says, when a country is losing many billions of dollars on trade with virtually every country it does business with, you wonder, why do they keep doing that if they're always losing money? Trade wars are good and easy to win. There we are. When we are down $100 billion with a certain country and they get cute, I like his language, don't trade anymore, we win big, it's easy. Well, just don't trade anymore and you win. Well, remember, why do people trade? It's for mutual benefit. We don't normally, I make mistakes in trade sometimes. I buy something and say, oh, it wasn't what I expected. So we all have regret and mistakes. But then I don't keep doing that. Right? I stop buying that thing that you eat and it turns out it's horrifying or terrible, or you don't like the flavor of it, and so on. You stop. So if you believe something is more valuable, you'll trade for it. If it's less valuable, you don't, although we do make mistakes. This is clear, and there's regret as well. Now, think about trade barriers. This word protectionism, Mohit touched on this. It's a very bad word. It's public relations for the anti-trade side. We're protecting our country. It's protectionism. A better term is restrictionism. It's also neutral. We restrict trade. Maybe that's a good thing. Doesn't tell you if it's good or bad. It's just a description. We restrict trade. Maybe that'll make us rich, or maybe it'll make us poor. Then we can have a discussion. But protectionism means protecting, like you protect your family, right, from predators or from diseases and so on. Well, a tariff or a trade barrier is harder for consumers in that country, that is where the government has restricted it, to buy goods or services from others. You put taxes on imports or quotas. You can't bring in more than so many bananas. That's the limit on banana imports. And then there's lots of other burdens that are often restrictions that are presented as health and safety measures and so on. So there are a lot of countries where they say, we have to inspect everything that comes in to show that it's suitable for being eaten by Jordanians or Egyptians or Israelis or Norwegians or whatever. The Republic of Georgia, when they had a period of liberal governance, did something very smart. They said, okay, well, we're fine, and we're not against health and safety inspections. All you have to do is certify that this good passed the health and safety inspections from Japan, Korea, United States, European Union, et cetera, et cetera. They said if it's good enough for Japanese people, it's probably good enough for Georgian people. So they eliminated all those trade restrictions. But prior to that, they said, we have to inspect everything on Georgian standards. It was huge burdens to trade. And they just said, just show it meets the standards from other high-income countries. It's good enough for us. Eliminated huge restrictions on trade. Now, Henry George put it very neatly. This is one way to think about it. What protection, again, I hate that term, restriction, teaches us is to do to ourselves in time of peace what enemies seek to do to us in time of war. So what do you do to your enemy in time of war? You blockade their ports. This is what Russia has done to Ukraine. They tried to destroy the ships in Odessa and stop the trade, Ukrainian trade by sea. That's what you do to your enemy. But protectionism, restrictionism, says you should do that to yourself in the time of peace. Well, if it's harmful to the enemy in war, why do it to yourself in time of peace? You're imposing harm on yourself, was his point there. So if someone is doing this to him or herself, one person is strangling himself, what is the optimal response to this behavior? Naturally, this, right? So one person is strangling himself with these trade restrictions. Optimum response, I'll strangle myself. This is what the trade war mentality encourages. It's not clearly beneficial. These two parties are not gaining from this experience. If he's going to do this, she'd probably be better off removing her hands from her own neck. She's not improving her situation by doing that. Now, Mises put it very neatly that these feelings of sympathy and friendship, belonging together, are the fruit of social cooperation made possible by mutual advantage. That's not to denigrate them, and this is again a mistake when people, non-economists, criticize economics. Say, "Oh, you don't care. You know the price of everything and the value of nothing." That's an old bit of slander. That's not the case. Love, friendship, mutual feeling, community, these are all valuable things. They're beautiful. But they're made possible by having a system of prices, of cooperation, and exchange. There's not a trade-off in that sense. One makes the other possible. Now, ancient people understood that. There's a passage in the Odyssey, which I had read 3 times in my life, covered before. So once when I was a boy, when I mainly liked the fight scenes and everything, and then in college, and then another time, and then I was injured for some time, and I couldn't walk for a long time, and so I read a lot, because that's what you do when it's hard to walk and you're in agony. So I reread the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Kalevala, the Finnish texts, and a lot of others, and short versions of the Ramayana, and so on. That was my experience. And I read this again, and this passage really almost jumped out of the page at me. Not literally, it didn't actually leap on me from the page, but it just was really striking. And the question is, I'll come back again, the Cyclops. If anyone knows the story, so Odysseus is traveling home from the war. The Iliad is about fighting. It's a teenager book. It's for teenage boys. It's all glory and fighting. The Odyssey is an adult book. It's a book for adults. Odysseus is finished with the wars. He wants to go home to his wife. This is his quest. He wants to go home. And he has many adventures on the way, stopping and delaying him from getting to his wife, who's got all these suitors, because he was like, Odysseus is dead. All these men are coming to try to win her in marriage. And he wants to get home. And on the island of the Cyclops, their ship runs aground. And it's traditional, and on the Greek island, you come to my island, your ship crashes, I give you food and water and hospitality. And then there's a reciprocity. Someone else will do that for me. So it's a fairly stable convention in these islands. And Zeus, the overall father god, is called the god of strangers because he sees. If you really cheat someone, steal from them, kill them, and take their goods from the ship, Zeus will see it, and there will be consequences for you. So you give what is called a guest gift to someone coming to your island. And Odysseus, but the Cyclops attacks and eats the soldiers, consumes them, devours them. And Odysseus says, what is our guest gift? What is my guest gift for coming here? And the Cyclops says, you have a point. I will eat you last. And in the hierarchy of guest gifts, this is like very low. It's not very attractive guest gift. So he's quite brutal. And then Homer asks the question, why is the Cyclops like that? They're so savage. And the answer, the Cyclops have no ships with crimson prows, the red-colored painted start point of the ship, no shipwrights or shipbuilders there to build them good, strong craft that could sail them out to foreign ports of call, as most men risk the seas to trade with other men. So the Cyclops is a savage because he doesn't trade. It's trade that causes us to see other people as something other than meals, right? Whereas the Cyclops sees these people as food has landed on my island. Or, alternatively, to be a little bit nasty, He lives in the ideal world of the anti-globalization movement. All the production and consumption is local. They don't trade with other people. But the consequence is to be a savage. And so there are other things we can talk about, but I was going to offer a gift to all of you. So if you're interested on these issues, I have a couple of books that I have co-authored. Oh, find these. I have them in here. Well, this book with my colleague Matt Warner, we made a deal with the publisher, Routledge, that 1 year after it appeared in, there it is, there we go, in the bookshops, in exchange for giving back all of our royalties, there went my Mediterranean yacht with the helipad for my helicopter. In exchange for that, they put it online as an open access book. So you can go to the website, Routledge.com, put in Palmer Warner, or you can just use this QR code. And when you click on it, you'll see a little line that says open access. So you can download the whole book as a PDF. And I'm not going to say free. I have enough economics background not to make this mistake. It's not free, but the price is zero. That has a zero price. So how are we on time?
40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes.
Okay. So there are a lot of other things we can talk about that I could even go through on this issue of trade balances, which is the foundation of Trump's mistake. He said, we're losing money. He confuses a so-called trade deficit on the merchandise and services side with a budget deficit or losing money. So if we have Arjun and I have a trade deficit, he's my grocer, I give him money, I buy more groceries from him, then I sell to him, then I must have lost. I've lost by the amount of money I paid. And this is the approach that Trump and others have. It's quite common, and I'll bet you get some of this in Indian discourse as well. So we could talk about that. Any thoughts that people would like to share on these questions? Yes, sir.
So I'll just give you an example. Just want to share some thoughts. No question. We had long-standing peace in the state of Kerala for the last 300 or 350 years, and parts of Gujarat as well, because there were traders and manufacturers and of different religion. They always stayed in peace because there was mutual benefit, and then the moment you remove that, and then you have problems.
No, this is clear enough, and actually one of the contributors to the horrors that Europe experienced, too many people forget, and this is something I will remind, Western values. Tom is proposing Western values. And I always reject this when people, usually conservatives from Europe or America, say, oh, you're advancing. I say, well, really not. I mean, let's think about some Western values. Fascism, right? Mussolini was not Japanese. Mussolini was Italian. This is European. Communism. Of course, Karl Marx, famous Chinese theorist, he's German, right? Friedrich Engels, his co-author and financier, German. Stalin, Georgian, because sort of on the cusp between Europe and Asia, but typically considered European. Lenin, Russian. Hitler, of course, the outlier, he was Indian, as everyone knows. He engaged in one of the most egregious acts of cultural appropriation, taking a very important symbol from this region of the world and turning it into a symbol of hatred and violence and cruelty. The swastika, Hakenkreuz in German. Those are Western values also, and I'm not interested in defending them. Some values you can find Western thinkers who advanced them, Adam Smith and so on, or Voltaire. But you can also find people advancing those in other civilizations, in China and India as well. So I am interested in human values. So we forget the horrific horror that happened in Europe. All those people who talk about Western values politely glide over the history of criminality and violence and domination. One of the horrors of World War I, it was preceded by trade restrictionism and mercantilism, which is a contributing feature, the contest between the German and the British empires to grab territory aside and force them into unique trading relationships that were quite exploitative. But then also, with the end of the war, huge trading zones were disrupted, notably the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it had a lot of disadvantages and features about it that were not very attractive. But at the end, they had established religious toleration, civic toleration, multiple races, if you will, or languages, and so on, within one huge economic zone with no trade barriers, and a rapid private expansion of railways, so the lowering of transportation, and there was tremendous flourishing. Then comes this European idea, nationalism. Each nation gets a state, inevitably a state that has a minority from a neighboring nation who are now enemies, enemies who must be destroyed, and every one of them has this, but they blocked the trade. They stopped trade. So look at, for instance, if you go to Europe, there's a country, Slovakia, and a country, Austria. Trade was virtually stopped between the two. In fact, Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, was on the end of the streetcar from Vienna before World War I, before the end of World War I, the establishment of the separate states. People in Bratislava would take the streetcar, like a bus, or to go to the opera in Vienna and then return home. And then, so think about how integrated they were. And then that was stopped and nothing could be traded across those. And this contributed greatly to the nightmare of the Second World War, which saw now violence on just an extraordinary organized scale. So trade restrictions led up to that and caused this hatred and disharmony between people who prior to this time, they spoke different languages, they had different religions, but more or less they got along. And then they became enemies, enemy peoples. So this contributed to that. You had a thought over here? Yes, sir? And then you had one, okay? Is that right? Okay, let's start here and then here.
So, sir, you mentioned this beautiful passage from Cyclops, from sorry,
The Odyssey.
about Cyclops,
Mhm.
right? And I mean, it actually reminded me of what European Union is doing to tech companies. If you think about it, because they have restrictions, so they are not able to home grow tech companies, and they literally bully both the big tech and smaller companies into having unrealistic laws restricting, let's say, AI, or
Yeah.
very weird privacy laws which no one can actually obey. So I actually know Europeans who are very worried that, okay, whenever I visit google.com, there's such a long consent
Yeah,
form that
right,
comes
right.
up that,
Which
okay,
no one reads.
yeah, and then, but they force them to sort of display it every time you visit Google. Sort of.
Yeah, I
And
think that's,
it's rather,
it is a reasonable point. And one of the things we've seen is these things, as I mentioned before, often here's the reason we're given for it, and here's really why it's happening, right? And they're not the same. And some of the privacy, so-called privacy restrictions are of that character. Now, there are issues. If I want to say, I will share information with you under certain conditions, and we make an agreement, you're obligated to respect those. It turns out most people don't think that's very important, much less so than elites do. So as an example, I shop, so I buy vegetarian food and cat food, which is regrettably not vegetarian. So now, because I get a loyalty card at the store, I get a little discount, and now they know Tom has cats, and Tom likes high protein vegetarian food, right? Oh my God, I'm being oppressed by this. Well, it means I get advertisements geared to me. So I don't get a lot of juicy steak advertisements, and I don't get advertisements for dog food. I get cat food and vegetarian and cat toys and everything else. Um, it turns out, now some people get spooked by that. In the aggregate, with all this information being gathered, they can make a lot of predictions about what you're likely to like and offer you advertising. So there was a case, a journalist had written about it. He was shocked. So why did my daughter get in the mail a circular about baby products? What is going on here? Well, it turns out she then had that conversation with mom and dad. And somehow the algorithms had picked up from her search patterns that she was pregnant. Although she didn't share that with anybody, but they could tell based on searching for certain things. And without any malice, that she got on a list that now got a circular in the mail for baby products. So the guy said, well, it turns out these algorithms were more clever than mom and dad were at learning about this. I don't find that particularly offensive to me, but some people do. They'll then use this as an argument to restrict foreign firms. And I think we should unveil it for what it is. The other thing is that it has some negative consequences for low-income people. So there is something called credit bureaus. This is very important. And they're highly restricted in Europe and much less so in the US, although there are a lot of Americans who want to restrict them. This is always elite people not thinking about the consequences for non-elites. A credit bureau keeps information about my behavior. I've learned I pay all my bills on time. And I don't carry a credit balance anymore. Right? When I was much younger, I did. And I'll give you an example of why this is important. When I was a very young person and out on my own, I got a credit card. You got these offers. Okay, I'll get it. But I didn't understand how to monitor my own behavior. I didn't have any experience in that way. And I used the credit card to buy things, and then I couldn't pay it. So it was like a nightmare. So I was 17 years old, and I had this credit card bill, and I didn't have the money to pay it. And they call you, by the way, collection agencies. And it was really humiliating and terrible and caused a lot of anxiety for me. And I got one of the collection agencies called me and said, look, we don't want to hurt you. We just want to get the money for the bank that loaned it to you. You spent the money. We'll work out a payment plan with you. There's no reason you should be harmed. We can make each other whole. Here's the payment plan. You pay so much per month that you can afford. Your credit card, of course, is canceled. Can't charge anymore. And then it'll be paid off. We will get the full amount owed to us with interest, and you won't have a problem. Then I was offered a credit card that was a prepaid one. So you had to, and I saved up $500. It was a substantial sum of money. And I gave $500, wrote a check, this is before electronic things, sent them a check for $500. Then I could use the card up to $500. And if I used 70 and I paid 70, I still had the 500 limit. And I did that because it's convenient. You don't always have cash. This is before ATM machines. This is like ancient history. So you couldn't go get money from a bank. If you didn't have cash, you couldn't buy anything. And you'd have to sign a check, and it was very difficult to get people to accept a check from you. So the card was very valuable. Well, I did that for some period of time. I don't remember how long, a year or something. And then the credit bureaus picked up, he pays his bills on time. He's a good credit risk. And then I started getting offers for credit cards of the more normal type. What had happened? Instead of going to prison, you're a bad man, we will hurt you, go to prison, credit bureaus are forgiving. They say, what is your likely future behavior? I learned a painful lesson, and I was readmitted into the community of borrowers and lenders. Very peaceful arrangement. Very rich people don't worry about this very much. But I was not a very rich person. I was a self-supporting teenager with not much money. And so this was really important to me, to be able to get access to credit. When you restrict the ability to share the information like that, which is to say the bank that I'm paying shares the information with other potential lenders to me, now we have people saying, oh my God, it's a violation of Tom's privacy. But that means if you restrict the ability to do that, the likelihood that Tom, a low-income person, can be readmitted into the community of borrowers and lenders drops dramatically. Then you end up with, okay, you can only be readmitted, but at really high interest rates because they have to deal with the risk, because they don't know that I actually changed my behavior. And so you'll be paying huge, gigantic interest rates in order to be able to borrow credit. And so these things like the privacy restrictions are often high-income people thinking, oh, I don't want people to know about me. But it makes opportunities for low-income people much harder. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, like, do you think that free trade can sometimes affect the nation's sovereignty? There are times where, probably the nation will feel that they're dependent on the other parties, and also at times when free trade is something for the peace of the country, there might be times where there's geopolitical tensions. For example, China and US. So maybe trade between them would be more chaotic than considered as more of a peaceful solution. So what's your views on that?
Well, let's think about it in the following ways. So there are some cases, I think, that are reasonable to say that there are national security defensive considerations that should enter at the trade policy. They're pretty rare, and we hear the sovereignty case invoked way beyond any reasonable use of it. So when Argentina, it's an interesting case, they had these people said these trade and investment violate our sovereignty. And unsurprisingly, Argentina has been swirling around the drain for years because of this. And under President Menem, they began a program that allowed foreign investment, and in particular in telephony, telephones. So prior to this time, it would take on average 16 years to get a telephone installed. There was a state monopoly, which was sovereign, and you had to apply, and 16 years later, the phone guy would come by. So the consequences, people would have all these illegal, you tap into these wires and list and get other people's phone calls, which led to lots of confusion and, of course, bitterness among neighbors as you were listening into everyone's conversation. People would buy a house because it had a phone in it. So basically, you're buying a giant phone booth, right? And it was the phone that you wanted. And so you would have to buy an apartment to get the phone. And when President Menem allowed foreign investment and some competition, the opposition of the Peronists hardcore was, you're trading away our sovereignty. And Eduardo Helguera, who is a businessman there, just passed away recently, did a very funny television program with a journalist. They said, we are going to discover the roots of our sovereignty. They took a telephone, and on the TV, they dismantled it to look for the sovereignty. It's in here somewhere. So they took off the speakers, and we look in, and I don't see any sovereignty there. And they dismantled the whole phone. They said, maybe one of the parts is the sovereignty, and so on. It was a very effective way of rebutting this silliness. Now, let's come to those cases that might be justified. Let's take, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's in the news a lot. We could also think about some things with regard to Israel and Lebanon and Palestine and and so on. For the European Union to forbid the export of certain goods to Russia doesn't mean it doesn't happen, by the way. It might make it slightly more costly. There might be some reason for that when they expect the chips to be embedded in a missile that will be sent to kill you. Okay. We know that it hasn't blocked the trade. I have friends who now have documented lots of Japanese and American and European chips and components in these giant missiles coming in. You open it up and it says Texas Instruments and so on, written right there on the chip. Now, as it turns out, who knew Kyrgyzstan is a major importer of electronic components? Surprise! Must be a gigantic Kyrgyz electronics industry. Of course, they're just going right into Russia. So, sorry? Yeah, there's rerouted. But even that, it made it a little bit more costly. And you might say, okay, there's some reason for that. Restrictions on exports of goods that will be used by torture regimes for torturing and oppressing people. Okay, I can see that. So I think that there's a category that you could say, you could put legitimate restrictions when they'll be used to torture people, used as instruments of brutal oppression, or they'll be used as instruments of war. And I think there are real cases now where we can identify those. They're a tiny fraction of global trade, very small. The other ones are the blood diamonds questions. I think that there are reasons to have restrictions on those. You have to prove the provenance, the origin of these diamonds, and certain other goods like that. But then these are always used as excuses for forbidding the trade in grapefruit. Well, really? Or textiles or other things of that sort. The other form that this takes is we're going to restrict the exportation of textiles from this low-income country because it's exploitative, because the workers are only getting 40 cents an hour or something, which no one would work for that in England. Therefore, we must forbid it. Those make those people worse off. And that's not a hard argument to show that this is a harm imposed on those people that forbids them climbing up the ladder of success. You just, if you have a ladder and the rungs are these steps, it's like having a ladder and saying we're going to knock out the lower 12 rungs. And they say now climb the ladder. Well, you can't do it. But your point is really important. There are some exceptions, but I think they need to be carefully justified instead of the way it's usually done as just a sweeping restriction on trade because of this 1/4 of 1% that could legitimately be restricted.
A question I wanted to ask your opinion on, say, some of the trade blocs that we have, say, for example, OECD or some of the other ones, and your general views on multilateralism.
Yeah. Multilateralism has kind of petered out. So WTO trade rounds, the Doha rounds, last one, nothing more has happened. And most of the action has been unilateral. Some people point to the bilateralism, and there's some of that. I'm not against those things. But unilateral is actually carried the bulk of the weight for about the last 25 years in terms of any trade liberalization. It's been mostly unilateral. And this goes back to this question of what Henry George argued. It's presented as some brilliant strategy. If you have trade restrictions on the goods my people will export to you, I'll impose trade restrictions on your not on you. I'll impose trade restrictions, if I'm the sovereign government, on my people's ability to buy goods from your people. Ha ha! I got you, right? Well, I'm imposing huge harms on my own population to do that. And probably better just not to do that and say, well, there's suffering imposed by your policies, but we're not going to compound it by strangling ourselves. The European Union's an interesting case. It's often misunderstood as a trade bloc. So there are 0 trade restrictions going from Denmark to Portugal, which is awesome, Also, no more borders. I'm old enough to remember you had to go at every border and show your passport. It was a nightmare. Now that's all gone. And one of the most wonderful signs I've ever seen once was driving from France to Belgium, and the decaying customs post that was being reclaimed by nature as grass and trees were going to say, yes, yes, it's gone. It's going to be like the ancient temples that have disappeared into the jungle, right? In the 1,000 years, people say, what was this? Some temple which they offered money to the gods of, of, of the customs agency. And so that's all gone. But the European Union, actually, its external trade restrictions have also been falling. So it is true, this is an issue with Britain leaving, that they now face trade restrictions they hadn't before. But EU trade restrictions are a tiny fraction of what they were 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and a tiny fraction of global trade restrictions. So on net, I think the EU has been a good thing for Europeans because it actually has brought about lower external, zero internal barriers and slowly falling external barriers. That's pretty positive. It could have been different. So this is the one that Putin has proposed, the Eurasian Union, which has not taken off. He really squeezed and compelled Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan to join. The Kyrgyz over huge opposition from Kyrgyz population because now they're restricted in their China trade, which is very important. Kyrgyzstan is a big transshipment location. They have huge markets of Chinese goods that are then brought on to Russia and Europe. And now those were deeply restricted. The Kyrgyz got, again, to use a technical word, screwed by this deal. But they were overwhelmed by the Russian military and corruption machine. That is a huge external block. And it's not, I don't think there's been any advantage to other than state-favored firms in Russia who have benefited from this. Everyone else has been harmed because it has this high external barriers. So I'm a unilateralist is the best, bilateral second. If we could restart Doha around and bring about a general reduction, I'd favor it, but it's not working. And Trump did everything he could to destroy it. Not allowing judges to be appointed in trade dispute cases means there are no judges now available to decide cases under WTO rules. So it's out of steam. Is that sufficient? Yes, ma'am.
So I just had a question. So given the rise of brinkmanship in both international politics and
Uh-huh.
domestic governance, how do you believe that liberal democracies can negotiate for stability? Also,
For negotiate for
principal negotiation, like the trade you're saying. So principal negotiation between the international within the international politics and domestic. Also, how it will help in destabilizing the risk of brinkmanship in this
the risk of.
brinkmanship.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you give me an example?
Okay. So like you were telling her about the blood diamonds and
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Okay.
So kind of because before going to a war, like what sort of decision does a country take? For example, Ukraine and Russia. So most of the time, at what time does it decide to attack?
Hmm.
So that's where brinkmanship comes into play. So my question is, how can both the countries relate to each other for principled negotiation?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think ideology drives wars more than most people think, and this is something economists have to understand also. Ideology matters because it determines what we perceive to be our interests. So yes, you can say, well, interests drive behavior, but ideology is what frames what we think is our interest. So let's take the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's not much economic justification in the usual sense. Putin keeps comparing himself to Peter the Great. That's it. He's always talking about Peter the Great, who expanded Muscovy into the Russian Empire and was the first to call it Russia. Before that, it was called Muscovy, which is what the Ukrainians call them. They say they're Muscovites. They're not Russians. They're Muscovites. They're followers of the Prince of Muscovy. And his is driven by ideology. What's the gain? I mean, look at what they've lost. 610,000 casualties on the Russian side. It's really quite staggering. And then the vast destruction of their military hardware and so on, and then the suffering in Ukraine. Whole cities totally destroyed. So the Russians can come and occupy them, but they occupy cities they flattened. If you go to these towns, there's just ruins. They look like Germany after World War II. It's a nightmare. Where's the gain from that? Well, the gain is in the ambition of a dictator. This is much more common. So ideology matters. It is an ideology of great Russia. Ukrainians don't exist. It's a fake nation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, given ideology is important in these questions, how can you counter it with interest? This is what John Prince Smith put very neatly. He was a German economist, despite the English name. He was a member of the Reichstag and a writer, and he was a big free trader. And he said, if only we could come to see every foreigner as a potential customer, we might be less likely to shoot them. Because there's something you notice. When you go into stores to buy something, rarely do they shoot you when you're trying to offer to exchange money. And he said, that's how we should see people. If we saw them as potential customers, we'd be less likely to shoot them. And that's important. So there's a lot of literature, academic literature, and I think two names come to mind. Eric Gartzke, Gartzke, who's professor at University of California, San Diego, and Patrick Michael, I'm pretty sure, but let me check the name because I'm confused. They're two usually first names in European names. I think it's Patrick Michael from University of Texas on the free trade piece. And Gartzke pointed out that actually a robust predictor of peaceful relations, not certainty, remember I talked yesterday, there's no certainty, there's more and less likely, is the volume of trade between countries, just the volume of trade. But Michael then added to that, he said, well, when you disaggregate down to a finer level, it's private trade. That is the important character. State trade does not predict peace. And what is the vast bulk of exports from Russia? Overwhelming. They have very little industrial output. They do sell military goods to India and other countries, so they sell that kind of, but that's state to state. Almost no consumer goods that are not state dominated. What are their big export industries? Oil and gas. Those are owned by the state. There's only one private oil company left in Russia, and the CEO recently fell out of a building. Very sad. And as did several other officers of the company, had unfortunate accidents recently involving high-rise buildings. And so it's state trade. And he says that has no positive impact on peace. Why? It all belongs, in the Russian case, it all belongs to Putin. And he was willing to pay the price of the loss of oil and gas markets in order to be remembered as Vladimir the Great, which is part of his vision of what he wants to be in the books like Peter the Great as restoring the Russian Empire. So what John Prince Smith was saying was roughly as follows. If you've got an international border, if everyone can see this, so here we have the border between two countries, every act of private trade creates at least two parties who have an interest in the maintenance of peace. And the more we multiply that, the more parties we have who are likely to be voices for peace, because they will bear economic consequences of the disruption of trade. It doesn't make it inevitable, it doesn't make it a guarantee, but every additional one we get makes the likelihood of war a little bit less. And that's a good thing. That's the best we can do, in my opinion. But you then find people who are critical of the free trade peace. They say, here are two countries, they had trade and war happened. Your theory is rubbish. And I don't think they're thinking about this in a serious way. It's about probability. We look like we're out of time.
Almost. So
Okay.
there's one more.
One more. You get to choose. What? Yes, sir.
Just to like give a bad example of trade, like the East India Company, which came to trade with India, it monopolized.
Absolutely, yeah. The monopoly was the key.
It monopolized the trade. So
Yes, that's right. This is one of the reasons why the Americans, and later the Indians, there's some connection, rebelled. Because what happened was the Americans said, we are now forced to buy tea from a monopoly company rather than on the market from anyone we want. That was the Boston Tea Party. Taxed tea from a British monopoly, and they said, we want to buy the tea we want to buy and not have to have it imposed on us. So there was an earlier example, and they were successful. It took India much longer to break out of that. But yes, this imposition of monopoly. I want to add one more quick point. This confusion that Trump has, and many others, about trade deficits, that they're bad. A trade deficit is the same as a capital account surplus. In accounting terms, they're identical. So here's two headlines. Bad news. Country runs trade deficit. Same facts, new headline. Awesome news. Foreigners increase investment in our country. Optimistic about our future. The same set of facts can generate two headlines. So which make us wonder, how as bad is this? So fundamental accounting identity. It's not an equation. This is what many people misunderstand. It's not an equation of economic growth or something like that. Savings minus investment equals exports minus imports. We could derive it algebraically. What it means is, in this context, if your imports are greater than your exports, it means investment is greater than savings. How can investment be greater than savings? Because foreigners are investing in your country. And most people are not horrified. And even Trump, he's so, how shall I put this delicately, dumb, that on the one hand, he says, oh my God, trade deficit is terrible, terrible. And then he says, I'm responsible for this foreign firm building a plant in America. Well, that actually drives the trade deficit. What really drives the trade deficit isn't the short-sightedness of consumers, it's the fact that foreigners want to invest in America, in American industry. That is the driver of the trade deficit. And if you want to eliminate the trade deficit, you eliminate the foreign investment, which Trump says is wonderful, but then he denounces it when it comes up as a trade deficit. So there's an incoherence. And thank you very much for your time.